The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. For the conclusion of Book 2, Part 1, Anthropogenesis, return to Sound File 8, because this program follows The Secret Doctrine and its study as stated by H.P. Blavatsky and Robert Bowen. Now to Book 2, Part 2, The Archaic Symbolism of the World Religions. The narratives of the Secret Doctrine are its cloak. The simple look only at the garment, that is, upon the narrative of the doctrine. More they know not. The instructed, however, see not merely the cloak, but what the cloak covers. From Zohar 3, 152, and Frank 119. The mysteries of the faith are not to be divulged to all. It is requisite to hide in a mystery the wisdom spoken. From Clementius Alexandrinus, Strom 12. Book 2, Part 2, Esoteric Tenets, corroborated in every scripture. In view of the strangeness of the teachings, and of many a doctrine which from the modern scientific standpoint must seem absurd, some necessary and additional explanations have to be made. The theories contained in the second part of the stanzas are even more difficult to assimilate than those which are embodied in Volume 1 on cosmogony. Theology, therefore, has to be questioned here, as science will be in the Addenda, Part 3. Since our doctrines differ so widely from the current ideas of both materialism and theology, the occultists must be ever prepared to repel the attacks of either or of both. The reader can never be too often reminded that, as the abundant quotations from various old scriptures prove, these teachings are as old as the world, and that the present work is a simple attempt to render in modern language and in a phraseology with which the scientific and educated student is familiar, archaic genesis and history as taught in certain Asiatic centers of esoteric learning. They must be accepted or rejected on their own merits, fully or partially, but not before they have been carefully compared with the corresponding theological dogmas and the modern scientific theories and speculations. One feels a serious doubt whether, with all its intellectual acuteness, our age is destined to discover in each Western nation even one solitary, uninitiated scholar or philosopher capable of fully comprehending the spirit of archaic philosophy. Nor can one be expected to do so before the real meaning of these terms, the alpha and the omega of Eastern esotericism, the words Sat and Asat, so freely used in the Rig Veda and elsewhere, is thoroughly assimilated. Without this key to the Aryan wisdom, the cosmogony of the Rishis and Arhats is in danger of remaining a dead letter to the average Orientalist. Asat is not merely the negation of Sat, nor is it the not yet existing, for Sat is in itself neither the existent nor being. Sat is the immutable, the ever-present, changeless, and eternal root from and through which all proceeds. But it is far more than the potential force in the seed which propels onward the process of development, what is now called evolution. It is the ever-becoming, though the never-manifesting. Note, the Hegelian doctrine, which identifies absolute being or beingness with non-being, and represents the universe as an eternal becoming, is identical with the Vedanta philosophy. End of note. Sat is born from Asat, and Asat is begotten by Sat, the perpetual motion in a circle truly, yet a circle that can be squared only at the supreme initiation, at the threshold of paranirvana. Barth started a reflection on the Rig Veda which was meant for the stern criticism, an unusual, therefore, as was thought, an original view of this archaic volume. It so happened, however, that, while criticizing, that scholar revealed a truth without being himself aware of its full importance. He premises by saying that neither in the language nor in the thought of the Rig Veda has he been able to discover that quality of primitive natural simplicity which so many are fain to see in it. Barth had Max Müller in his mind's eye when writing this, for the famous Oxford professor has throughout characterized the hymns of the Rig Veda as the unsophisticated expression of the religious feeling of a pastoral, innocent people. Quote, in the Vedic hymns, the ideas and myths appear in their simplest and freshest form, unquote, the Sanskrit scholar thinks. Barth is of a different opinion, however. So divided and personal are the opinions of Sanskritists as to the importance and intrinsic value of the Rig Veda that those opinions become entirely biased whichever way they incline. Thus Mr. Max Muller declares that nowhere is the wide distance which separates the ancient poems of India from the most ancient literature of Greece more clearly felt than when we compare the growing myths of the Veda with the full-grown and decayed myths on which the poetry of Homer is founded. The Veda is the real theogony of the Aryan races, while that of Hesiod is a distorted caricature of the original image, unquote. This is a sweeping assertion and perhaps rather unjust in its general application, but why not try to account for it? Orientalists cannot do so, for they reject the chronology of the secret doctrine, and could hardly admit the fact that between the Rigvedic hymns and Hesiod's theogony tens of thousands of years have elapsed. So they fail to see that the Greek myths are no longer the primitive symbolical language of the initiates, the disciples of the gods' hierophants, the divine ancient sacrifices, and that disfigured by the distance and encumbered by the exuberant growth of human profane fancy, they now stand like distorted images of stars in running waves. But if Hesiod's cosmogony and theogony are to be viewed as caricatures of the original images, how much more so the myths in the Hebrew Genesis, in the sight of those for whom they are no more divine revelation of the Word of God than Hesiod's theogony is for Mr. Gladstone. The poetry the Rig Veda contains appears to me, on the contrary, says Barth, to be of a singularly refined character and artificially elaborated, full of allusions and reticences, of pretensions, within brackets, to mysticism and theosophic insight. And the manner of its expression is which as reminds one more frequently of the phraseology in use among certain small groups of initiated than the poetic language of a large community. Unquote from Legends of India, page 13. We will not stop to inquire of the critic what he can know of the phraseology in use among the initiated, or whether he belongs himself to such a group, for in the latter case he would hardly have used such language. But the above shows the remarkable disagreement between scholars even with regard to the external character of the Rig Veda. What then can any of the modern Sanskritists know about its internal or esoteric meaning, beyond the correct inference of Barth that this scripture has been compiled by initiates? The whole of the present work is an endeavor to prove this truth. The ancient adepts have solved the great problems of science, however unwilling modern materialism may be to admit the fact. The mysteries of life and death were fathomed by the great masterminds of antiquity. And if they have preserved them in secrecy and silence, it is because these problems formed part of the sacred mysteries, and secondly, because they must have remained incomprehensible to the vast majority of men then as they do now. If such teachings are still regarded as chimeras by our opponents in philosophy, it may be a consolation to the theosophists to learn on good proofs that the speculations of modern psychologists, whether serious idealists like Mr. Herbert Spencer or wool-gathering pseudo-idealists, are far more chimerical. Indeed, instead of resting on the firm foundation of facts in nature, they are the unhealthy will-o'-the-wisps of materialistic imagination, of the brains that evolved them, and no more. While they deny, we affirm, and our affirmation is corroborated by almost all the sages of antiquity. Believing in occultism and a host of invisible potencies for good reasons, we say, certus sum, scio quod credidi, to which our critics reply, credat Judaeus appella. Neither is converted by the other, nor does such result affect even our little planet. Eppur se muove. Nor is there any need of proselytizing, as remarked by the wise Cicero. Time destroys the speculations of man, but it confirms the judgment of nature. Let us bide our time. Meanwhile, it is not in the human constitution to witness in silence the destruction of one's gods, whether they be true or false. And as theology and materialism have combined together to destroy the old gods of antiquity and seek to disfigure every old philosophical conception, it is but just that the lovers of old wisdom should defend their position by proving that the whole arsenal of the two is at best formed of new weapons made out of very old material. Section 16. Adami. Names such as Adami, used by Mr. Cholson in his Nabatean Agriculture, and derided by M. Renan, may prove little to the profane. To the occultist, however, once that the term is found in a work of such immense antiquity as the above cited, it proves a good deal. For instance, that Adami was a manifold symbol, originating with the Aryan people, as the root word shows, and having been taken from them by the Semites and the Turanians, as many other things were. Adami is a generic compound name, as old as languages are. The secret doctrine teaches that Ad-I was the name given to the first speaking race of mankind in this round by the Aryans. Hence the Adonim and Adone, the ancient plural form of the word Adon, which the Jews applied to their Jehovah and angels, who were simply the first spiritual and ethereal sons of the earth, and the god Adonis, who in his many variations stood for the first Lord. Adam is the Sanskrit Adanat, also meaning first Lord, as Ad Ishvara or any Ad, the first, followed by any adjective or substantive. The reason for this is that such truths were a common inheritance. It was a revelation received by the first mankind before that time which in biblical phraseology is called the period of one lip and word, or speech, knowledge expanded by man's own intuition later on, but still later hidden from profanation under an adequate symbology. The author of the Kabbalah, according to the philosophical writings of Ibn Gebirol, shows the Israelite using Adonai, Lord, instead of Eye, I am, and Yahweh, and adds that while Adonai is rendered Lord in the Bible, the lowest designation, or the deity in nature, the more general term Elohim, is translated God. Page 175. A curious work was translated in 1860 or thereabout by the Orientalist Cholson, and presented to ever-incredulous and flippant Europe under the innocent title of Nabatean Agriculture. In the opinion of the translator, that archaic volume is a complete initiation into the mysteries of the pre-Adamite nations on the authority of undeniably authentic documents. It is an invaluable compendium, the full epitome of the doctrines held of the arts and sciences, not only of the Chaldeans, but also the Assyrians and Canaanites of the prehistoric ages." Unquote. These Nabateans, as some critics thought, were simply the Sabaeans, or Chaldean star worshippers. The work is a retranslation from the Arabic, into which language it was at first translated from the Chaldean. Masudi, the Arabic historian, speaks of those Nabateans, and explains their origin in this wise. After the deluge, within brackets question mark, the nations established themselves in various countries. Among these were the Nabateans, who founded the city of Babylon, and were those descendants of Ham who settled in the same province under the leadership of Nimrod, the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham, the great-grandson of Noah. This took place at the time when Nimrod received the governorship of Babylonia as the delegate of Janhak, named Burajp. The translator, Trollson, finds that the assertions of this historian are in perfect accord with those of Moses in Genesis, while more irreverent critics might express the opinion that for this very reason their truth should be suspected. It is useless to argue this point, which is of no value in the present question. The weather-beaten, long-since buried problem, and the difficulty of accounting on any logical ground for the phenomenal derivation of millions of people of various races, of many civilized nations and tribes, from 3 couples, Noah's sons, in 346 years after the deluge, may be left to the karma of the author of Genesis, whether he is called Moses or Ezra. That which is interesting in the work noticed is its contents, the doctrines enunciated in it, which are again, if read esoterically, almost all of them identical with the secret teachings. Quatremer suggested that this book might have been simply a copy made under Nebuchadnezzar II from some Hamitic treatise, infinitely more ancient, while the author maintains on internal and external evidence that its Chaldean original was written out of the oral discourses and teachings of a wealthy Babylonian landowner named Kutami, who had used for those lectures still more ancient materials. The first Arabic translation is placed by Cholson so far back as the 13th century before Christ. On the first page of this revelation, the author, or amanuensis, Kutami, declares that the doctrines propounded therein were originally told by Saturn to the moon, who communicated them to her idol, which idol revealed them to her devotee, the writer, the adept scribe of that work, Kutami. The details given by the god for the benefit and instruction of mortals show periods of incalculable duration and a series of numberless kingdoms and dynasties that preceded the appearance on earth of Adam, the red earth. These periods have aroused, as might have been expected, the defenders of the chronology of the biblical dead-letter meaning almost to fury. De Rougemont was the first to make a levée in arms against the translator. He reproaches him with sacrificing Moses to an anonymous author. Berossus, he urges, however great were his chronological errors, was at least in perfect accord with the prophet with regard to the first men, since he speaks of Alarus Adam, or Xistuthrus Noah, and Belus Nimrod, etc. Therefore, he adds, the work must be an apocrypha, to be arranged with its contemporaries, the 4th book of Esdras, that of Enoch, the Sibylline oracles, and the book of Hermes, every one of these dating no further back than 2 or 3 centuries before Christ. Ewald came down still harder on Cholson, and finally Mr. Renan. In the Revue Germanique, the ex-pupil pulls down the authority of his master by asking him to show a reason why the Nabatean agriculture should not be the fraudulent work of some Jew on the 3rd or 4th century of our era. It can hardly be otherwise, argues the romancer of the life of Jesus, since, in this in folio on astrology and sorcery, we recognize in their personages introduced by Quatami all the patriarchs of the biblical legends, such as Adam Adami, Anuka Noah, and his Ibrahim Abraham, etc., etc., unquote. This is no reason, since Adam and others are generic names. Meanwhile, it is humbly submitted that, all things considered, an apocrypha, if even of the 3rd century A.D. instead of the 13th century B.C., as suggested by Quatremer, is old enough to appear genuine as a document, and so satisfy the demands of the most exacting archaeologist and critic. For even admitting, for argument's sake, that this literary relic has been compiled by some Jew of the 3rd century of our era, what of that? Leaving the credibility of its doctrines for a moment aside, why should it be less entitled to a hearing or less instructive at reflecting older opinions than any other religious work, also a compilation from old texts or oral tradition of the same or even a later age? In such a case, we should have to reject and call apocryphal the Quran, 2 centuries older, though we know it to have sprung, Minerva-like, direct from the brain of the Arabian prophet. And we should have to pooh-pooh all the information we can get from the Talmud, which in its present form was also compiled from older materials, and is not earlier than the 9th century of our era. The curious Bible of the Chaldean adept, and the various criticisms upon it, as in the Colson's translation, are noticed, because it has an important bearing upon a great portion of the present work. With the exception of Monsieur Renan, an iconoclast by principle, so pointedly called by Jules Lemaitre le Paganini du Néant, the worst fault found with the work is, it would seem, that the Apocrypha pretends to have been communicated as a revelation to an adept by and from the idol of the moon, who received it from Saturn. Hence, very naturally, it is a fairy tale all round. To this there is but one answer. It is no more a fairy tale than the Bible, and if one falls, the other must follow it. Even the mode of divination through the idol of the moon is the same as practiced by David, Saul, and the high priests of the Jewish tabernacle by means of the teraphim. In Volume 3, Part 2 of this present work, the practical methods of such ancient divination will be found. Reader's note. As is evident, the 3rd volume spoken of was ultimately withheld from the public, and the methods therein described have therefore not yet been made public. And reader's note. The Nabatean agriculture is a compilation indeed. It is no apocrypha, but the repetition of the tenets of the secret doctrine under the exoteric Chaldean forms of national symbols, for the purpose of cloaking the tenets, just as the books of Hermes and the Puranas are Egyptian and Hindu attempts at the same. The work was well known in antiquity as it was during the Middle Ages. Maimonides speaks of it, and refers more than once to this Chaldeo-Arabic manuscript, calling the Nabateans by their co-religionary name, that is, star-worshippers or Sabaeans, but yet failing to see in this disfigured word Nabateans the mystic name of the caste devoted to Nebo, god of secret wisdom, which shows on its face that the Nabateans were an occult brotherhood. Note: I will mention to thee the writings respecting the belief of the Sabaeans, he says. The most famous is the book The Agriculture of Nabateans, which has been translated by Ibn Wahouija. This book is full of heathenish foolishness. It speaks of preparations of talismans, the drawing down of the powers of the spirits, magic, demons, and ghouls, which make their abode in the desert. Maimonides, quoted by Dr. D. Cholson. Die Sabier und der Sabismus, Volume 2, page 458. The Nabateans of Mount Lebanon believed in the 7 archangels, as their forefathers had believed in the 7 great stars. The abodes and bodies of these archangels believed in to this day by the Roman Catholics, as is shown elsewhere. End of note. The Nabateans, who, according to the Persian Yezdi, originally came to Syria from Bushra, were the degenerate members of that fraternity. Still their religion, even at that late day, was purely Kabbalistic. Note: see Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, page 197. Nebo is the deity of the planet Mercury, and Mercury is the god of wisdom, or Hermes, and Buddha, which the Jews called the Lord on High, the Aspiring, and the Greeks Nabu, hence Nabateans. Notwithstanding that Maimonides calls their doctrines heathenish foolishness, and their archaic literature Saberum Fatum, he places their agriculture, the Bible of Quatami, in the first rank of archaic literature, and Abarbanel praises it in unmeasured terms. Spencer, quoting the latter, speaks of it as that most excellent Oriental work, adding in Volume 1, page 354, that by Nabateans, the Sabaeans, the Chaldeans, and the Egyptians, in short all those nations against whom the laws of Moses were most severely enacted, have to be understood. Nebo, the oldest god of wisdom of Babylonia and Mesopotamia, was identical with the Hindu Buddha and Hermes Mercury of the Greeks. A slight change in the sexes of the parents is the only alteration, as Buddha was the son of Soma, the moon in India, and of the wife of Brihaspati, Jupiter. So Nebo was the son of Sarpanitu, the moon deity, and of Merodach, who had become Jupiter after having been a sun god. As Mercury the planet, Nebo was the overseer among the 7 gods of the planets, and as the personification of the secret wisdom, he was a Nabin, a seer and a prophet. The fact that Moses is made to die and disappear on the mount sacred to Nebo shows him an initiate and a priest of that god under another name. For this god of wisdom was the great creative deity and was worshipped as such, not alone at Bosepa in his gorgeous temple or planet tower. He was likewise adored by the Moabites, the Canaanites, the Assyrians, and throughout the whole of Palestine. Then why not by the Israelites? The planetary temple of Babylon had its Holy of Holies within the shrine of Nebo, the prophet god of wisdom. We are told in the Hibbert Lectures the ancient Babylonians had an intercessor between men and the gods, and Nebo was the proclaimer or prophet, as he made known the desire of his father Merodach. Nebo is a creator like Buddha of the 4th and also the 5th race. For the former starts a new race of adepts, and the latter the solar lunar dynasty, or the men of these races and round. Both are the Adams of their respective creatures. Adami is a personation of the dual Adam, of the paradigmic Adam Kadmon, the creator, and of the lower Adam, the terrestrial, who, as the Syrian Kabbalists have it, had only nephesh, the breath of life, but no living soul until after his fall. If therefore Renan persists in regarding the Chaldean scriptures, or what remains of them, as apocryphal, it is quite immaterial to truth and fact. There are other Orientalists who may be of a different opinion, and even were they not, it would still really matter very little. These doctrines contain the teachings of esoteric philosophy, and this must suffice. To those who understand nothing of symbology, it may appear astrology, pure and simple, or to him who would conceal the esoteric truth, even heathenish foolishness. Maimonides, however, while expressing scorn for the esotericism in the religion of other nations, confessed esotericism and symbology in his own, preached silence and secrecy upon the true meaning of Mosaic sayings, and thus came to grief. The doctrines of Adami, the Chaldean, are, in short, the allegorical rendering of the religion of the earliest nations of the 5th race. Why then should Monsieur Renan treat the name Adami with such academical contempt? The author of the Origins of Christianity evidently knows nothing of the origins of pagan symbolism, or of esotericism either. Otherwise he would have known that the name was a form of universal symbol referring even with the Jews, not to one man, but to 4 distinct humanities or mankinds. This is very easily proven. The Kabbalists teach the existence of 4 distinct atoms, or the transformation of 4 consecutive atoms, the emanations from the Diokna, divine phantom, of the heavenly man, an ethereal combination of Neshmah, the high soul or spirit, this atom having, of course, neither a gross human body nor a body of desire. This atom is the prototype, Tsuri, of the second Adam. That they represent our 5 races is certain, as everyone can see by their description in the Kabbalah. The first being the perfect holy Adam, a shadow that disappeared, the kings of Edom, produced from the divine Tselem. image. The second is called the protoplastic androgyne Adam of the future terrestrial and separated Adam. The third Adam is the man made of dust, the first innocent Adam, and the fourth is the supposed forefather of our own race, the fallen Adam. See, however, the admirably clear description of these in Mr. Isaac Meyer's Kabbalah, page 418 et sequens. He gives only 4 Adams, because of the kings of Edom, no doubt. The fourth Adam, he writes, was clothed with skin, flesh, nerves, etc. This answers to the lower nephesh and guf, that is, body, united. He has the animal power of reproduction and continuance of species, and this is the human root race. It is just at this point that the modern Kabbalists, led into error by the long generations of Christian mystics who have tampered with the Kabbalistic records wherever they could, diverge from occultists in their interpretations, and take the later thought for the earlier idea. The original Kabbalah was entirely metaphysical and had no concern with animal or terrestrial sexes. The later Kabbalah has suffocated the divine ideal under the heavy phallic element. The Kabbalists say God made man male and female. Among the Kabbalists, the necessity to continued creation and existence is called the balance, says the author of Kabbalah, and being without this balance, connected with Ma'akum, mysterious place, simply the womb, the Holy of Holies with the Semites, even the first race is not, as we have seen, recognized by the sons of the fifth Adam. From the highest heavenly man, the upper Adam who is male, female, or androgyne, down to the Adam of dust, these personified symbols are all connected with sex and procreation. With the Eastern occultists, it is entirely the reverse. The sexual relation they consider as a karma, pertaining only to the mundane relation of man, who is dominated by illusion, a thing to be put aside the moment that the person becomes wise. They considered it a most fortunate circumstance of the guru, teacher, found in his pupil an aptitude for the pure life of Brahmacharya. Their dual symbols were to them but the poetical imagery of the sublime correlation of creative cosmic forces. And this ideal conception is found beaming like a golden ray upon each idol, however coarse and grotesque, in the crowded galleries of the sombre fanes of India and other motherlands of cults. This will be demonstrated in the following section. Meanwhile, it may be added that, with the Gnostics, the second Adam also emanates from the primeval man, the Ophite Adamas, in whose image he is made. The third from this second, an androgyne. The latter is symbolized in the 6th and 7th pairs of the male-female aeons, Amphion Esumene and Vananin Lamer, father and mother, vid the Valentinian table in Epiphanius, while the fourth Adam or race is represented by a Priapean monster. The latter, a post-Christian fancy, is the degraded copy of the anti-Christian Gnostic symbol of the Good One, or he who created before anything existed, the celestial Priapus, truly born from Venus and Bacchus when that god returned from his expedition into India, for Venus and Bacchus are the post-types of Aditi and the Spirit. The later Priapus, one however with Agathodamon, the Gnostic savior, and even with Abraxas, is no longer the glyph for abstract creative power, but symbolizes the 4 Adams or races, the fifth being represented by the 5 branches cut off from the tree of life on which the old man stands in the Gnostic gens. The number of the root races was recorded in the ancient Greek temples by the 7 vowels, of which 5 were framed in a panel in the initiation halls of the Adita. The Egyptian glyph for it was a hand with 5 fingers spread. The 5th or little finger being only half-grown, and also 5 N's, hieroglyphs, standing for that letter. The Romans used the 5 vowels A, E, I, O, V in their fames, and this archaic symbol was adopted during the Middle Ages as a motto by the House of Habsburgs: Sic transit gloria.